Title: She was replaced in public. But something didn't feel right. Have you ever been erased without anyone saying your name? At the gala, Ryan stood with his new fiancée, laughing, admired, untouchable. She fits my world, he said. And just like that, his ex-wife became a ghost. Not mentioned. Not defended. Just gone. But here's the part no one noticed. Certain people in that room stopped smiling. Because power recognizes something before it's revealed. And the way he spoke about her, it didn't match what they knew. He thought he controlled the story. He didn't know someone else owned the ending. Full story in the video below. Tag: relationship drama, billionaire CEO, public humiliation, ex-wife comeback, luxury revenge hashtag. Hashtag story, hashtag revenge fantasy, hashtag billionaire, hashtag drama, hashtag shorts, hashtag emotional comment. The entrance changes everything. Don't miss it. What if the man who once promised to build a life with you decided instead to replace you in a room full of people who used to call you home? Not with anger. Not with betrayal loud enough to fight back against. But with something quieter. Cleaner. Final. Emily Carter didn't hear the words when Ryan introduced his new woman that night. She didn't need to. Because humiliation doesn't travel through sound. It travels through absence. Through the way a room shifts when your name is no longer spoken, only rewritten. The gala was everything she remembered. Crystal chandeliers dripping light like controlled fire. Waiters moving with rehearsed precision. Conversations that sounded warm but never revealed anything real. It was the kind of place where power didn't announce itself. It was simply understood. And Ryan Carter understood that better than anyone. He stood at the center of it all, tailored perfectly, composed perfectly, every gesture measured as if even his breathing had been curated. Beside him stood Lily Monroe. Sharp, beautiful, effortless in the way that suggested effort had been outsourced. She wasn't just standing next to him. She was being presented. Lily, Ryan said, his voice calm, almost thoughtful, has a way of understanding what matters. A small pause followed, just enough to let the sentence land. Which is rare. The people around him smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was correct. That's how rooms like this worked. They didn't react. They aligned. Someone asked how they met. Ryan answered easily, smoothly, like the past had already been edited. Like Emily had never been part of the original draft. Timing, he said. Some people come into your life when you're ready for more. More. Not better. Not different. Just more. It sounded harmless. It wasn't. Because in one word, he had reduced an entire marriage into something insufficient. Something incomplete. Something he had outgrown. And the worst part? No one questioned it. Not the friends who had once sat at Emily's table. Not the people who had toasted their wedding. Not even the ones who knew exactly how much she had given to help him build the life he was now showcasing. Because truth, in rooms like this, is not what happened. It's what survives. And Emily Carter had not survived his version. She had been edited out. Quietly. Elegantly. Completely. He didn't insult her. He didn't blame her. He did something worse. He replaced her. And in doing so, he made it look like she had never belonged there to begin with. He replaced her. He didn't upgrade. He just changed the story. And everyone believed it. That was the part no one ever talks about. Not the betrayal. Not the leaving. But the rewriting. The moment when your existence becomes optional in someone else's narrative. The moment when the room agrees with the version of you that hurts the most. But what Ryan didn't understand, what he never stopped to consider, was that silence doesn't mean absence. And being unseen doesn't mean you're gone. Because while he was standing under perfect lighting, telling a story that made him look complete, Emily Carter was somewhere else. Not broken. Not waiting. Not erased. She was just no longer playing a role that had been written to make her disappear. And when someone like that decides to walk back into the room, they don't come back the same. They come back as the truth no one was prepared to face. Have you ever been erased so completely that people start agreeing with a version of you that never existed? The gala didn't get louder as the night went on. It got sharper. Conversations narrowed. Eyes lingered longer. And Ryan Carter made sure every one of those moments worked in his favor. He moved through the room like someone who had already won something no one else knew was being contested, his hand resting just lightly enough on Lily Monroe's back to signal possession without effort, confidence without question. She fit beside him perfectly. That was the point. Not love. Not connection. Alignment. Lily laughed at the right moments, leaned in at the right angles, her presence polished into something almost strategic. "You two look incredible together," someone said, raising a glass. Ryan smiled, not too wide. "It helps when you stop forcing something that was never right," he replied, casual, almost reflective, as if speaking about a business decision instead of a person. A small pause followed, then a few nods. Agreement disguised as politeness. And just like that, Emily was no longer a woman he had loved. She was a mismatch he had corrected. The shift was subtle. That was what made it brutal. No one defended her. No one even hesitated. Because in rooms like this, people do not protect the past. They align with the present. A woman who once called Emily a friend tilted her head slightly, studying Lily's dress, her posture, her effortless composure. "She just feels more current," she murmured. Current. As if Emily had been outdated. As if human connection had an expiration date. Ryan did not interrupt. He let the sentence settle into the room. Let it become truth through repetition, through silence, through lack of resistance. He was not just moving on. He was upgrading publicly. And everyone was watching. And worse, everyone was agreeing. "You built something incredible," another man said to Ryan, glancing at Lily with approval. "Now it actually reflects it." Reflects it. The implication hung there, unspoken but understood. Emily had not reflected his success. She had diminished it. She had been invisible in the wrong way. Not mysterious. Not elegant. Just unnoticed. And now, standing beside Lily, Ryan looked complete. That was the illusion he was selling. That his life had always been meant to look like this. That Emily had simply been a temporary version of something unfinished. He replaced her. He called it growth. He turned loss into a narrative. And the room accepted it. That was the real humiliation. Not that he brought someone new, but that he made the past look small. Made her look small. And no one questioned it. But here is what Ryan never noticed. Not once. Not even when the room shifted in ways too quiet for him to hear. There were people who stopped smiling just a second. Too late. People whose eyes lingered not on Lily, but on the gaps in his story. Because power does not just recognize presence. It recognizes absence. And the way he spoke about Emily did not match the weight of what had been erased. He thought he controlled the narrative. He thought the room was his. He thought perception was permanent. He thought she was gone. That was his mistake. Because somewhere beyond the edges of his carefully constructed moment, something was already moving. Not loudly, not dramatically, but precisely. And when it arrived, it would not ask for permission to be seen. What if the moment you thought broke you was actually the moment you stopped belonging to a version of yourself that was too small? Emily Carter did not cry that night. Not when she first heard about the gala. Not when she saw the photos. Not even when someone, meaning well but not enough, forwarded her a message that simply said, "I thought you should know." A picture. Ryan in a tailored black suit. Lily beside him, radiant, effortless, exactly the kind of woman people describe as inevitable. Emily stared at it longer than she expected. Not because it hurt the way it used to, but because it did not. That was the first shift. Quiet. Almost unnoticeable. Pain had a texture she knew well. Sharp. Immediate. Consuming. But this was something else. It was distance. The kind that does not scream. The kind that simply removes weight. She set her phone down on the kitchen counter of her small apartment, the light from the window catching dust in the air like suspended time. For a long moment, she just stood there. Not thinking. Not reacting. Just present. And then something inside her, something that had been bending for years without her realizing, finally stopped. Not snapped. Not shattered. Stopped. She walked to the mirror, not searching for reassurance, not trying to fix anything, just looking, really looking, at the woman who had spent years adjusting herself to fit a life that required her to be quieter, smaller, more agreeable, less complicated. A version of herself that had been slowly edited down until she became easy to replace. "She fits my world." The words reached her now, not as a wound, but as clarity. Of course she did. Because that world had never been built for someone like Emily to expand in. It had only ever been a space where she could shrink. And suddenly, the loss did not feel like rejection. It felt like release. He did not choose someone better. He chose someone easier to display. That was the difference. And for the first time, Emily did not feel left behind. She felt unbound. That was the second shift. Subtle, but irreversible. She moved through her apartment differently after that. Not faster, Not more confident in the obvious ways, but more certain, as if every step no longer needed permission from a past version of herself. She opened her closet and paused, not because she had nothing to wear, but because she realized she had been dressing for a life that no longer existed. Soft colors, safe choices, pieces that blended instead of stood out. She reached past them, deeper, until her fingers touched fabric she had not worn in years. Something bold, something that once felt like too much. She pulled it out slowly, holding it up to the light. It did not look excessive anymore. It looked honest. That was the third shift. She was no longer asking how to be accepted. She was deciding how to be seen. He thought she was not enough. He never saw who she was becoming. And that was his second mistake. Because transformation does not announce itself. It builds quietly, beneath disappointment, beneath silence, beneath every moment someone underestimates you. And by the time it is visible, it is already complete. Emily did not rush. She did not make calls. She did not need to prove anything yet. But somewhere in the stillness of that apartment, in the space between who she had been and who she was no longer willing to be, a decision settled into place. Not dramatic, not loud, final. She would not return to that room as someone asking to be remembered. She would return as someone impossible to ignore. And the difference between those two versions of a person is everything. What if the version of you they dismissed was only the surface of something they never had access to? Emily Carter did not return to that night with noise. No dramatic messages. No sudden announcements. Just movement. Quiet. Intentional. Precise. The kind of movement that does not seek attention because it already knows where it is going. The days after. The gala invitation did not look extraordinary from the outside. She still walked the same streets. Still passed the same storefronts that reflected a life that once felt smaller than it should have. But something had shifted beneath that routine. Something that did not need validation to exist. Because hidden power does not introduce itself. It reveals itself when it is too late to question. Her phone buzzed one morning with a message that did not carry a name most people would recognize. No emojis. No urgency. Just a time. A location. And a single line that read, "We will finalize tonight." Emily looked at it for a moment longer than necessary. Not surprised. Not anxious. Just aware. Because this was not new. It had simply never been visible. That was the difference between who she had been and who she had become. She had spent years standing beside Ryan while he built something the world admired. Sitting quietly in rooms where decisions were made. Listening more than she spoke. Absorbing patterns people assumed she did not understand. She had not been excluded. She had been underestimated. And there is a difference. One leaves you powerless. The other leaves you unnoticed. And unnoticed can be dangerous. She remembered the meetings. The conversations that continued after she left the room, thinking she was no longer relevant. The names, the connections, the fractures in systems that looked perfect from the outside. She had seen it all, not as a participant, but as something more valuable. An observer. That was where it began. Not as revenge, not even as ambition, just as awareness. And awareness, when left alone long enough, becomes leverage. The evening air carried a quiet chill as she stepped into a building most people passed without realizing what decisions were made behind its glass. No flashing signs. No public recognition. Just understated power. The kind that does not need to be explained because it controls what gets explained. Inside, conversations paused. Not dramatically. Not obviously. But just enough to acknowledge presence. Not curiosity. Recognition. That was new. Or rather, that was finally visible. A man in a dark suit nodded once, subtle, respectful. "Miss Carter," he said, not loudly, not formally, just correctly. She did not correct him. She did not need to. Because names, in rooms like this, are not about identity. They are about position. Had changed long before anyone noticed. Documents were placed on the table. Numbers. Structures. Ownership that extended far beyond what most people in that gala room could even define, let alone understand. She did not rush through them. She did not hesitate either. Just a steady hand, a clear mind, and the kind of calm that does not come from confidence, but from knowing exactly what something is worth. Including yourself. He thought she had nothing. He never saw what she was building. That was his third mistake. Because while Ryan was perfecting how things looked, Emily had been learning how things worked. And the difference between those two paths is not visible at first. It only becomes obvious when one collapses and the other takes control. She signed the final page without ceremony. No announcement. No reaction. Just a quiet shift that changed more than anyone in that ballroom could possibly imagine. Outside, the city moved the same way it always had. Lights, noise, movement that never stopped. But for Emily, something had settled into place. Not as a plan, not as a strategy, as certainty. She was not returning to that gala to be seen. She was returning because she already was. And when a person walks into a room knowing that they do not need to prove anything, they only need to arrive. What if the most dangerous thing about being underestimated is the amount of time it gives you to prepare? Emily Carter did not announce what had changed. She did not need to, because the kind of power she was stepping into did not arrive with noise. It arrived with access. The kind you do not ask for. The kind that is already waiting when you walk in. The building she had entered the night before was not unfamiliar. That was the part no one would have guessed. She had been there before. Not as someone they greeted. Not as someone they remembered. But as someone who listened. Sat quietly at the edge of conversations that shaped outcomes worth millions, sometimes billions, absorbing patterns that most people never realized they were revealing. Back then, she had been invisible by design. Now, she was invisible by choice. And that is a very different kind of presence. The follow-up meeting did not happen in a boardroom filled with voices competing for control. It happened in a private office where silence carried more weight than words. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed the city like something owned rather than admired. A man stood near the window, not turning immediately when she entered, as if he did not need to check who had arrived. He already knew. "You move carefully," he said after a moment, his voice calm, measured. Not a question, an observation. Emily did not respond right away. She stepped further into the room, setting her bag down with a quiet precision that mirrored everything about her lately. "Carefully," she repeated softly. Not slowly. A pause. Short. Intentional. The man nodded once, as if that distinction confirmed something he had already decided. Documents were already prepared. They always were at this level. Nothing reactive. Everything anticipated. Pages that represented more than numbers. Influence. Positioning. Ownership structures layered in ways that concealed as much as they revealed. Emily flipped through them without hesitation, her eyes moving steadily, not searching for reassurance, but confirming alignment. Because this was not new to her. It had just never been visible to anyone else. He thought she was out of the game. He never realized she changed the board. That was his fourth mistake. The man finally turned, extending a pen toward her, not offering it, simply placing it within reach. There was no explanation. None was needed. In rooms like this, people do not explain power. They recognize it. "Once this is signed," he said quietly, "there is no partial involvement." Emily's fingers rested lightly against the paper, not tense, not uncertain. Just still. "There never was," she replied. And then she signed. No pause. No second glance. Just a decision that had already been made long before this moment existed. The kind of decision that does not come from emotion. It comes from clarity. Outside, the city continued in its endless rhythm, unaware that something fundamental had just shifted beneath it. Not in a way that made headlines. Not in a way people could point to immediately, but in a way that would reveal itself when it mattered most. Because real power does not show itself early. It waits. It positions. It lets the wrong people feel comfortable. That was the part Ryan never understood. He believed timing was about visibility, about showing up at the right moment. But Emily had learned something different. Timing is about control, about knowing exactly when to be seen and when to remain invisible. She did not rush back to the gala. She did not need to arrive early, to reclaim space, to announce her presence. That would have been the old version of her. The one who still believed she needed permission to exist in a room like that. This version did not ask. She chose. And that choice came with something far more powerful than attention. It came with inevitability. Because by the time she walked through those doors, the outcome would already be decided. Not by chance. Not by emotion. By design. And the most dangerous part of all, Ryan Carter would not see it coming. Not until he was already standing inside it. What if the night he planned to prove he had everything was already designed to show him what he never understood? The gala was no longer just an event. It had become a stage. Not the kind with lights and scripts, but the kind where power revealed itself without warning. By the time the evening settled into its polished rhythm, the room had already shifted into something sharper, something more deliberate. Conversations were no longer casual. They were strategic. Every glance measured. Every introduction calculated. And at the center of it all stood Ryan Carter, exactly where he believed he belonged. Untouched. In control. Certain. Lily Monroe remained at his side, her presence as precise as ever, her smile effortless, her posture aligned with the world he had built so carefully. Together, they moved through the room like a finished statement. Complete. Or at least, that was how it appeared. Tonight matters, Ryan said quietly to a small group gathered near the main floor, his tone calm, but edged with something deeper. Anticipation. We are finalizing something significant. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. In rooms like this, mystery is a form of currency. The less you say, the more people lean in. And they did. Investors adjusted their stance slightly, attention narrowing, curiosity sharpening into interest. Because whatever Ryan Carter was about to announce, it was expected to change things. That was the narrative building around him. That was the momentum he was feeding. But beneath that surface, something else had already begun to move. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. A shift in who people were watching. Not openly, not obviously, just enough to create a difference. A hesitation, a recalibration. Near the entrance, a quiet ripple passed through a cluster of guests as someone mentioned a name not usually spoken casually. Not loudly, just enough. He is coming tonight. No explanation followed. None was needed. Because certain names do not require context. They carry their own gravity. Across the room, Ryan caught only fragments of it. A glance. A pause in conversation. But he dismissed it quickly. Because it did not fit into the version of the night he had already constructed in his mind. And when people are certain of their position, they rarely question what does not immediately serve it. He thought the attention was his. He did not realize it was shifting. That was his fifth mistake. The energy in the room grew denser as the hour moved forward, not louder, not chaotic, just heavier, as if something was about to arrive that would require space. Conversations shortened. Laughter softened. Even the music seemed to pull back slightly, no longer filling the room, just existing within it. Lily leaned closer to Ryan, her voice low, composed. Something feels different tonight. He smiled, reassuring, confident in a way that had never failed him before. That is because people know something is about to happen. He was not wrong, but he was not right either. Because what was about to happen was not his. Near the far end of the ballroom, a group of executives who had not acknowledged Ryan earlier now stood in quiet discussion, their attention not on him, but on the entrance. Waiting. Not impatiently. Not eagerly. Just expectant. The kind of waiting that does not belong to curiosity. It belongs to certainty. Ryan noticed it this time. Only for a second. Only long enough for something unfamiliar to move through him. Not fear. Not doubt. Just disruption. A crack in the narrative. He adjusted his cufflinks, grounding himself in something controlled, something known. Because control had always been his advantage. But control depends on awareness. And awareness requires seeing the full room. He was not. He was still looking at the version of the night he believed he owned. Meanwhile, the real version was still arriving. And when it did, it would not ask for attention. It would take it. What if the moment right before everything changes feels almost invisible to the person about to lose control? The room had settled into a strange kind of stillness, the kind that does not come from silence, but from anticipation that has not yet revealed its reason. Ryan Carter felt it now. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to notice that something no longer aligned with the version of the night he had constructed so carefully in his mind. Conversations continued, but they no longer orbited him. Not entirely. Not like before. There were glances now that moved past him. Pauses that did not wait for his voice to fill them. Attention redirecting. Subtle, but undeniable. Lily remained composed beside him, her posture unchanged, her expression still polished into quiet confidence. But even she had begun to notice it. The way certain people no longer leaned in when Ryan spoke. The way a few key figures in the room had shifted their position, not physically, but socially. Like they were orienting themselves toward something else. Something not yet visible. You said this was your night, she murmured softly, her tone controlled, but edged with something sharper. Not doubt. Not yet. None was needed. Because certain arrivals do not require introduction. They create their own. The effect was immediate. Not dramatic. Not chaotic. Just precise. Conversations shortened. Postures adjusted. Attention sharpened. The room did not react. It aligned. Ryan felt it this time. Fully. The shift. The difference between being the center of a room and being just another part of it. His jaw tightened slightly, though his expression did not break. Years of control held it in place. But beneath that control, something unfamiliar moved, standing exactly where she had once been erased. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not loud, but sharp. Recognition layered with confusion. Because this was not the version of Emily they had accepted. This was something else. Something refined. Something undeniable. Ryan's breath slowed, though he did not realize it. His eyes fixed on her, searching for something familiar. Something smaller. Something he could explain. But it was not there. She did not look back at him immediately. She did not need to. Because the room had already begun to shift around her. And then he saw him. The man who stepped forward beside her was not introduced. He did not offer his name. He did not need to. Because the reaction was immediate. Subtle, but absolute. Postures straightened. Conversations ended. A few people who had ignored Ryan entirely now turned fully, their attention no longer divided. Alexander Hayes. Billionaire CEO. The kind of name that does not circulate. It lands. Lily's hand tightened slightly against Ryan's arm, the first real crack in her composure. That is, she began, but the sentence did not finish. It did not need to. Everyone in that room knew exactly who he was. And more importantly, what his presence meant. Emily did not announce anything. She did not explain. She simply walked forward, each step measured, calm, inevitable. Alexander beside her, not leading, not following. Aligned. That was the difference. Not possession. Not display. Partnership. And that difference changed everything. Ryan's expression did not collapse. It did something worse. It froze. Because for the first time that night, he was no longer looking at someone he had replaced. He was looking at someone he had never understood. He thought she needed him to belong in rooms like this. He never realized she had outgrown the version of the room he could access. That was his final mistake. Emily stopped just within the center of the space, not claiming it, not forcing attention. She did not need to. It was already hers. Alexander's voice, when it came, was calm, controlled, and carried just far enough to be heard without effort. Emily, he said, not as introduction, not as explanation, as recognition, as fact. And in that single moment, the narrative shattered. Because the room was no longer looking at Ryan Carter as the man who had moved on. They were looking at Emily Carter as the woman he had misjudged. Entirely. Completely. Irreversibly.